everyone, and welcome to the CFMA webinar series. My name is Ariel Sanchirico. I'm the Director of Online Learning at CFMA, and I will be your host for this program. Thank you all for joining us for this special broadcast on uniting the construction industry behind suicide prevention. Over the past several years, the topic of suicide prevention in construction has become a special cause for CFMA and its affiliates. We hope that this presentation helps to bring awareness and assistance to all of those attending today and to our industry at large. Please note that this is a 90-minute session that grants 1.5 CPE credits. During the session, you will see alertness pop-ups appear on screen, which allows us to monitor audience participation. When these pop-up boxes appear, you will have a short amount of time to confirm your attendance, so everyone please pay close attention. Don't miss those checkpoints as they are required by NASBA to receive your CPE credit. Our session today will include polling questions. When the polling slides come on screen, please click on the polling notification to answer. We also encourage you to ask questions at any time during the broadcast. If anyone would like to ask a question during the session, just click on the Q&A button in the lower left-hand panel of the screen. Our presenters will do their best to answer as many questions as time permits before the end of the webinar. Finally, please take a moment, if you have not already done so, to download the handouts under the resources bar, also on the lower left-hand panel of the screen. CFMA would like to thank our producing companies, SSC Global and Lakeside Industries, and we would like to thank SSC Global for sponsoring this event. All right, without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, CFMA's own President and CEO, Stuart Binstock.
Thank you, Ariel. You might ask yourself the question, if you're not a member of CFMA, those from CFMA might be familiar with this issue and why we're involved, but if you're not, you might ask yourself, why did a financial management association get involved in the topic of suicide prevention? There are a couple of things that have happened over the last year and a half that have led us to where we are today. First of all, Cal Beyer, who was participating in this session, and you'll hear from later, is really the reason we're all here today. Cal's a very modest man, probably red-faced now that I've said that, but the reality is none of this would have happened. CFMA would not be involved if it wasn't for Cal Beyer. And you'll hear his passion about this issue in a few minutes. Cal came to us in December of 2015 and said he had an article that he wanted to write for our award-winning magazine, Building Profits, on the topic of suicide prevention. Christy Dombosky, a publisher, editor of the magazine, came into my office and said, we've never done anything like this before. What do you think? I said to Christy, it certainly is out of the realm of our typical article, but it sounds like something that could be of interest and impact the industry, so let's do it. And so from November, December 2015, a lot's happened. The first thing that happened is we have a listserv on our website. It's called the Connection Cafe. It's a listserv where our members get a chance to ask questions and get them answered by other members. Well, the listserv kind of exploded when Cal's article came out. There was a tremendous response from our membership, tremendous interest in the topic. And we knew that this was probably bigger than we had realized it would be. Our largest chapter, the Valley of the Sun in Phoenix, Arizona, held a summit on suicide prevention in April of 2016. They brought in CFMA members. They brought in construction industry CEOs. They had a very, very effective event that really kind of kicked off our efforts, and they've shown great leadership since that point in time. Then we moved to July of 2016, when the Center for Disease Control came out with a report that quite honestly confirmed everything that we thought and confirmed that this was a major industry problem. Michelle Walker, in a couple of minutes, will talk about the CDC report and what the numbers showed in terms of construction and the incidence of suicide. But the bottom line is it verified to us that this was a major construction industry issue that no one else was addressing. Because of that, in October of 2016, we organized the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention. We asked a number of construction industry organizations to join us. We solicited not only construction industry, but also mental health professionals. And you'll see at the bottom right, there's a listing of 22 organizations, in addition to CFMA, that are currently part of the Construction Industry Alliance, which is all about providing awareness and information to the construction industry, and is the main reason why we're having this session today. That gives you a brief outline of how we got to where we are. Now let me introduce the presenters for today. I've already mentioned Cal Beyer, the Director of Risk Management at Lakeside Industries. The second speaker I've also mentioned, Michelle Walker, the VP of Finance and Administration at SSC Boring. Michelle wears many hats. The other hat that she wears in CFMA is that she's the chair of the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention. The third speaker is Bob Swanson, who's a friend and a retired painting contractor. He was the CEO of Swanson and Youngdale. And Bob has a very personal and moving story to share with you today. With that, let me toss it over to Michelle Walker.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just to run through what our objectives for today's session are, is to really gain an understanding of why construction is such an at-risk industry for mental illness and suicide, and what we as construction business people can do to help that. Gain a general knowledge of mental illness, the warning signs and steps that can be taken to help, and become aware of the tools, resources, and organizations that are available to help companies to build a caring culture and protect this at-risk workforce that we have. What our goal for this really is to have the light bulb moment. What we've realized over the last year is that it takes hearing the stories, hearing the information behind it to become impassioned with why this is a critical topic for everyone to be aware of and to act on. And so our hope for this webinar is to reach a new audience, to bring that awareness, and that you'll be able to share this webinar with others afterwards who you think might need to hear this message. So with that, we're going to talk about why this is a construction industry issue. As Stuart alluded to, there is a CDC study that was released in July of 2016. But before that, we had already started working on this topic, and we had already hosted our summit here in Phoenix. And at that time, the best information that we had is that maybe construction was a top 9 industry. And that was alarming enough on its own. Why were we in the top 10? That sounded like a scary enough subject. But then when you start working in it and you start understanding the issues, it really became a question of how are we only there? We really might be higher. So when the CDC study came out in July, it was really not a surprise to any of us that construction and extraction were number 1 in the number of deaths by suicide and number 2 in the suicide rate. The rate in construction is 53.3 per 100,000, which is 4 times the national average of suicide rate. When you look at the number of suicides in construction, which is much higher, the rate only falls to number 2 because we're behind farming, fishing, and forestry, which just have a lower demographic pool to pull from. But when you combine the construction industry with architecture and engineering to create the very commonly looked at community of AEC, we're number 1 overall by far. So this is a pressing national public health concern. In 2015, 43,000 people died of suicide, which equals about 117 deaths per day. It's the second leading cause of death for men ages 25 to 54, and 78% of suicides are in the male population, which right there is going to lead to our number 1 risk factor is basically our workforce is the most at-risk pool, just by being men in that age group of 25 to 54. The great news is, and the reason that we're here today, is that suicide is preventable. It's part of a 24/7 zero accident safety culture, and Cal will talk more about that later. So what are the risk factors that put our construction workforce so at risk? It's our mentality of this stoic, old-school, tough guy mentality. The stigma surrounding mental illness, that it shows weakness, that it shows that you are less than, is prominent, and we need to fight that battle and create a culture where it's accepted that people may need help for mental illness. There's a definite issue with leadership, people advancing because of the skills that they have without getting formal management, people skill training to be able to manage people and address issues outside of just work performance issues. We have a culture, we have work demands where travel is required and can lead to family separation and isolation, along with shifts that can create sleep disruption and deprivation, which can be real tipping points for somebody who may already be dealing with mental illness, or the family separation if they're already dealing with substance abuse issues. The financial issues that come along with seasonal layoffs, end-of-project furloughs, those can create added stress and, again, be the tipping point in somebody already dealing with mental illness. Our culture is tolerant of alcohol and substance abuse, and while we may have very strict drug testing programs in place, there is an underlying culture that I'm sure we're all aware of, and an article that Cal shared last week on the rampant amount of substance abuse in our industry, and those are all risk factors for suicide. And a lot of that may come from the chronic pain and the highest use of prescription opioids in our industry, that pain that results from years of physical work, in addition to possibly workforce injuries that never were properly treated. Our workforce typically does have access to lethal means that make the planning of a suicide possibly less difficult than those who don't have that access. And then there's just this overall feeling that they may be trapped in this job, they may be trapped with no way out, and if they go somewhere else to get help or to work in a less demanding industry, that they're not going to be able to provide for their family. So these, among with many other issues, or what I was referring to before, that when you start digging in them and seeing that all the problems that can create this issue, why we weren't terribly surprised when that CDC study was released. And finally, it's just a workforce concern, construction or not. It's our responsibility as employers to help people that are facing these challenges. So 25% of the population is typically living with a diagnosable mental illness at any time, but less than 20% of those people will seek help. If they do seek help, there's an 80% success rate of overcoming that mental illness, and that's a huge success factor. And we need to be that bridge to connect them with the treatment that will help them deal with their mental illness. And from a financial standpoint, the mental illness can result in up to 200 million lost workdays per year. In a 3-month period, a depressed individual can miss on average 4.8 days of work and suffer 11.5 days of reduced productivity, which is termed as presenteeism. So they're there, but they're not really performing at full performance. And then it can really help to reduce other related incidents that can affect quality of life, employability, such as domestic violence, family issues, crime. This is just really one topic that we can address, and it can help with so many of our workforce issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart for our first polling question.
Okay, our first polling question. Did you know that the construction industry, before this webinar, did you know that the construction industry is number one for number of suicides and number two for suicide rate? A, yes, B, no. So we'll take about 30 to 40 seconds to get everybody to respond to that. I should mention, while you're completing this, we've had some correspondence with folks in the UK and Australia, and they have similar programs to what we've tried to do here. Actually, they may be even a little further along, but this is clearly an issue that goes way beyond the United States. This is an issue across the world, and that was kind of surprising to us, I think, as well. And here are the results. And I guess the key point there is 65% of you did not know that before this. So that's important because I think that starts the education. That obviously means that this is an important event for us to hold, and we can make some progress along the way. Let me turn it over to Cal Beyer now.
Stuart, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you to you and CFMA, the leadership of your executive committee and your national officers when this topic was approached was unprecedented. Our industry has had this great need for many years. Prior to that article that you referenced in 2015, there was an article in 2009 also in Building Profits, and that article was called The Human Element of Crisis Risk Management. And that article was supposed to be the first of a three-part series. The second was going to be psychological safety, and the third was going to be suicide prevention and mental health. Because of that first article, I was appointed to serve on a task force for an inaugural organization in 2010 called the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. I was a member of the Workplace Task Force. And with that Workplace Task Force, we were going to develop strategies to help impact suicide prevention in the workplace. I was the first and only, at that point, non-clinical member of that task force. And so I brought a lot of experience I had from the insurance industry and a passion I've had for the construction industry, and most of all, my mission as a safety and risk professional of saving lives. And when people ask us, why the workplace? Why is this a workplace topic? Because this can be a manifestation or an outgrowth of a caring culture. Michelle's used that term. It's the term I use in my company for our safety 24/7 culture. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, why in the workplace, suicide rates in the U.S. continue to rise, and it's especially among working age adults. So given the significant time that we spend as employees at work, the workplace can play a key role in helping bring awareness, two, bring strategies, and three, bring solutions for people who are at risk and struggling. And third, employee benefits are another method by which we can bring peace and calm to our families. It's not just a worker issue, it's a family issue. And a fourth reason is many of us are involved in outside activities, whether it's in a church or in a community or with our children's schools. Sometimes it's coaching youth sports. And we're able to cut across a broad spectrum if we bring solutions to the workplace. So we're pretty excited about opportunities to impact the workplace. A couple of studies I want to cite. One is the World Health Organization. Michelle's already talked about some of the issues with respect to productivity and lost work days and presenteeism. But going a step beyond that, World Health Organization talks about depression as a leading cause of disability worldwide. And it's been predicted that an average of approximately 12% of organizational disability claims can be attributed to mental health or substance abuse issues. This won't be the first time you hear an overlap between mental health and substance abuse disorders. So what I want to stress is a second study is the International Foundation of Employee Benefits Plans. They go by the acronym IFEBP. They're based near my hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in Brookfield, and they released a study in 2016 that said 93% of North American employers offer some sort of mental health or substance abuse benefits. And they had a study that showed results of how concerned these organizations were about this topic. 94% of organizations reported that their workforces are stressed. And this topic of stress is one that continues to surface and resurface in different fashions. I'm keynoting at a leadership conference for a company in Oregon this week, and the person who follows me is someone who specializes in stress management from the discipline of yoga. That'll be the first time in my 30 years of doing organizational presentations I will be followed or preceded by a yoga specialist. Secondly, 61% of those respondents to that survey said depression is prevalent in their organization. Many years ago, people did not talk about this topic. This was a taboo topic. There was the term stigma. And I remember when I was talking to Christy Domboski when she was approaching Stuart about writing that article, and someone used the phrase that this wasn't your usual safety topic. Someone else described it as an upsetting topic. Another person described this as really an unsettling topic, and then a fourth person described it as kind of creepy. Why is Cal writing about this? And I decided to write about it because I lost a friend 2 years ago. And despite being his manager and helping him through a series of mental health challenges, I learned some lessons despite having been involved in this topic for many years. And my goal was, how could I help empower more people in the workplaces to help talk about this topic? And if we could break the stigma, then we would have an opportunity to get people help. And now we've been recruiting an army of volunteers who are taking this message to their workplaces, and they're starting to reach out to their EAPs. They're reaching out to other organizations that provide mental health, substance abuse, and other social services to help employees and families who are at risk. It's nothing less than, remarkable. And another shout out for CFMA for taking that lead. Michelle referenced a topic that I want to just highlight real quickly. It's the comorbidity between suicide risk and the drug and alcohol problem in our industry. There was an article recently called Hard Hat High. It's part one of a two-part series. It was featured in equipmentworld.com, and it's a very good article posted on February 20th, 2017. And it talked about 12% of construction workers using illegal drugs on a monthly basis, which is double the national average. Moreover, they identify industries with substance abuse disorders by industry, and construction was number 2 at 14.3%. And by drug use, it listed a very broad category of drugs. It did include marijuana, which is legal in some states, which creates some of the tension around this particular topic of drug testing. Speaking of drug testing, like Michelle, even when construction workers know that they're going to be tested, 3 to 5% are testing positive. It shows you that this is a challenge. And the last quick study I want to highlight is of heavy alcohol use by industry. The mining or extraction industry is number 1, construction number 2. So you can see this recurring pattern where we at CFMA said we want to do something to better equip and empower the workplace, and that was the workplace leaders. So the last thing I want to identify is this men in the middle phenomenon on this slide. It was a study from November 2015, and the article was featured in the New York Times, and it was done by a Nobel Prize winner. I mention that because I felt it was significant. He was studying why in one of the wealthiest countries in the world was the middle class dying off at an alarming rate. And what was really unique to me is his wife is a renowned medical physician. And so there was a lot of credibility in that study. As someone who is an active leader in a construction financial management association, that Nobel Prize in economics spoke to me. And this men in the middle phenomenon, when I read this article, really reminded me of the workers in my company. I'm responsible for 700 lives, my team and I are. And when I read this study, it showed this increased mortality to suicide, substance abuse, and alcohol addiction for white middle-aged men aged 45 to 54 with less than a college education. And we talk so much about the workplace workforce shortage and crisis, and we have to do a better job taking care of the workers that we have. And as I read that study, 2:30 in the morning, I sat at my desk and images of people that I've worked with previously and people that I work with presently floated through my mind. And I said, I've got to continue to do more. And so by doing more, what I have been doing is recruiting more volunteers to the Workplace Task Force of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. This year, I'm serving as a co-chair along with a woman that you're going to hear me speak about in a moment. Her name is Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas. She's been very tireless in her pursuit of teaching us at CFMA about the dynamics of mental health and suicide prevention. And through Sally's efforts, I had an opportunity to speak at the White House in January of 2016 that led to an appointment on the executive committee I feel like I'm representing the construction industry. I feel like I'm speaking for those employees who at this point can't speak for themselves, other than through all the volunteers in countless companies in various regions across this country. And what's really been powerful for me is to see what started as an initiative has become a movement of similar-minded professionals focused on human capital, risk management, and safety, and it's been powerful. I've shown a picture of Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas because I've learned a lot from Sally. It was to become a bold leader. It was to stop talking about mental health, because all that did is made people feel it was for HR, for the attorneys, for the clinicians. And when I started talking about suicide prevention, people viewed it as a safety challenge and said, what can I do to help? And that's where we are at today. So along this journey, I've met a remarkable gentleman. His name is Bob Swanson. He is a construction executive. He says he's retired, but he's doing a lot of work with us on this initiative. He has a sad story, but it's a story of hope and meaning. It's a story that has given us deeper understanding of the dynamics of mental health and mental illness. I used to live in the Twin Cities, so the 13 years my family and I lived there, I never knew this great gentleman who hails from there, and that's where his company was based. And it's ironic to be working now across the country with this gentleman, Bob, although he could have done this if I'd known him. And Bob, your story has been so powerful. I want to share now the microphone with you to tell the story about mental health and how it touched your family.
Thank you, Cal. I am in the league of what's called a suicide loss survivor. That is my oldest son, Michael, and he died by suicide on March 13th, 2009. And as I talk today, I'm going to introduce some new terminology that I would ask you to consider, and it's terminology that I have learned over the last 8 years. I said died by suicide. In my opinion, when we say a person commits suicide, we can blame them and discount the act. I choose to say the diseases my son had caused his death, and therefore he died by or died from suicide. So I choose to label the disease and not him. So I want you to look at that picture, and I want you to think about employees that you work with. I want you to think about neighbors, friends, family members. What do you see? I hope you see an individual, high energy, likable, caring, athletic, smart, and those were all the attributes Michael had. This picture was taken about 6 months before his death. However, what you don't see is the fact that's a mask. People with mental illness wear a mask, and they wear a mask because of the shame and stigma that goes with mental illness. That smile is not really what was going on inside Michael. But if you had asked Michael on that day, how are you doing, and you didn't know him, he would say, I'm doing fine, everything's good. And then you would just discount it, okay, everything's good, he looks fine. I didn't think he had a mental illness. Here's what you don't see. Michael lived with bipolar disorder level 1, which is the most serious of bipolar disorders. He lived with seasonal affective disorder, which is called SAD, and in the northern climates, pretty common in the winter because we don't get a lot of sunlight. He lived with anxiety disorder, and he lived with abuse of alcohol. And many people that live with a mental illness live with more than one mental illness. And many people that live with a mental illness also live with addiction to alcohol or drugs. So I want you to keep that face in mind and that you are not seeing the pain that was inside. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Michael's journey and our journey with Michael. Michael was born on June 4th, 1975. He did starting in preschool, comments by his preschool teachers were, this child has a unique curiosity. He has many talents. He has a curiosity about the world. That carried on all through school. He was, as a child, and as I could say as his parent, he was one of these kids that was always saying, how come, why, and always pushing the limits. Looking back, we noticed now we can identify it. In about ninth grade, he started changing. I don't think he knew what was happening, nor did we. And hopefully today we have more knowledge about some of these things. But he started showing instances of really uncalled anger, lack of energy, and to the point of difficulty getting up in the morning and getting going. This was totally not characteristic of him, but we thought, well, maybe it's just teenage adolescence. What we now know today is many mental illnesses do not totally manifest themselves until late 20s. I think he dealt with his illness through athletics. He was very gifted in athletics, captain of his high school baseball team, well-liked. So he graduated from high school. Things didn't seem alarmingly bad. Started college. And college over time was for many years, a challenge for Michael. The fall semester, straight A's, no problem. Winter, spring semester, I was always getting calls from the dean, your son isn't showing up to class, he isn't doing well, he's going to get a bunch of incompletes. I now know that was probably his seasonal affective disorder. At age 23, he was assaulted and sustained a major head injury. I do believe that trauma accelerated his illnesses. As we now know with the NFL and athletics, concussions are a serious matter. He had something more extreme than a concussion. He was in a coma for about 3 days. At age 29, he had his first attempt at suicide. At the time, because of the shame, both he and us as a family kind of discounted it as it was an accident. He didn't intend to. He was hospitalized and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. At age 33, he had a second attempt, and as I've stated, March 13th, 2009, he died by suicide. So what I want to talk about, I'm going to go back and just leave his picture on the screen. Living with a mental illness, both for Michael and for us as a family. One, we don't have good markers, so I'm going to have a lot of descriptions how this relates to physical illnesses, because a mental illness is a physical defect of the brain. The brain is not working properly. So because of the shame and because of the guilt, people with mental illnesses, as Michelle mentioned on one of the slides, don't get the help they need. They also think it's their fault, as I had those same feelings. What did we do wrong? From that comes a lot of guilt of, why can't I get better? So with physical illnesses, we have markers. If you're diabetic, you check your blood sugar. We don't have good markers with mental illnesses because you keep looking at that face. Everything looks fine. Living with a bipolar disorder. There's two major phases in bipolar disorder. There's the manic phase, and then there's what I would call the depressed phase. In the manic phase, there's a feeling you can accomplish anything. There's a feeling of excitement, high energy, and this can go for 2 or 3 days, and in Michael's case, he in those periods would hardly even sleep, not want to eat. He was just jazzed. So I recently read an autobiography of Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. He lived with bipolar disorder. He created the song Good Vibrations, driving down the highway, had the words and the music in his mind, pulled over, wrote the words, wrote the music, and it was never changed, and it went and got recorded. It just kind of shows you that tremendous creativity that they have in that moment. And I would use the analogy, if any of you have ever had your accelerator stick on your car, the engine is going so fast, it's not even safe for the car. At that point, the manic phase is kind of the same for the person. They're going at a speed that cannot be sustained. So then the second phase comes, and it comes rapidly, almost without notice, where Michael would go 2 or 3 days and barely even get out of bed. He had no energy, zero, no interest in doing anything. And back to the analogy of the car quits. If you've ever had an engine with the accelerator sticks, it just quits, and you can't get it started. He, unfortunately, near the end of his life, developed what's called rapid cycling. This is where going from manic to depressed can happen very quickly and very often through a matter of weeks or months, where he would say, my mind is out of control. I don't even trust my mind. So I want to throw out a couple thoughts. Labels, stigma. With mental illnesses, we say he's bipolar, he's schizophrenic. With physical illnesses, we don't say he's cancer or he's heart disease. With physical illnesses, we separate the person from the illness. In mental illnesses, we don't do that, and I would submit we have to. Once we separate the person from the illness becomes what we challenge and work on and have compassion then for the individual. I'm going to use that cancer again. We don't blame someone for having cancer, but we tend as a society to blame someone for having a mental illness. What's wrong with them? Why don't they get better? We never do that with a physical illness. To suicide for a minute. Suicide is a horrible act. Why does somebody commit suicide? I should say, I said the wrong, die by suicide. One, their brain isn't working properly. Two, they want to end the pain. Again, tie this to a physical illness. My brother, who's been gone now almost 3 years, had a multitude of physical illnesses that all cascaded at the end of his life. He told me 2 days before he died, and they couldn't control his pain. All I want is the pain to end. I would submit my son did the same thing. All I want is my pain to end. And his way to end the pain, he only saw one way to end the pain. Last, the media tends to make this sound like a glamorous act. It's a lonely act. Most suicides are done in a lonely fashion with no one else around. And I would submit all of us want to be with our loved ones when we take our last breath. In Michael's case, that did not happen. Now, if I could just speak a moment on my journey of grief and healing. A suicide death in a family is handled far different by society than what I would call natural causes. Natural causes, people come and try to support you, have great compassion, rally around you. In the instance of a suicide death, even good friends of ours avoided us. We were very lonely the first year after Michael's death. People don't know what to do, so then they don't even do anything. And there's still the shame and the blame. Like, geez, if he had taken his meds, if Bob had done something different, maybe they should have taken him to some different hospital. There's all those factors that get put on the family. I lived with the first couple of years tremendous guilt, tremendous shame, and anger. It was very lonely. Thankfully, before Michael died, we were introduced to NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. They do some great work in helping families understand someone living with a mental illness through support. You know you're not alone, education, and advocacy of legislation. After Michael's death, I was introduced to SAVE, Suicide Awareness Voices of Education. I attended a SAVE men-only support group for nearly 3 years, through that I got strength, I got some healing, and I realized I wasn't alone. And I realized I was not at fault. The last was my faith. I've always had a strong faith, but about 4 years ago, I felt I couldn't be angry about this. I couldn't keep blaming myself. Through my faith, over time, I said, what am I supposed to do about this? And I've got the clear message through many others guiding me that I'm supposed to speak out, and through our story, honoring my son, hopefully I can help others. And that's what I have done today. Hopefully I will have been of some help to all of you. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart for the second question.
Thank you, Bob. That is a very moving story, and we appreciate your bravery in telling it. Let's go to question number 2. Have you experienced mental illness or had suicidal thoughts? Or have you observed either of these in a family member? A, yes, personally. B, yes, the family member. Or C, no, I have no personal family experience. I will tell you that I didn't realize the prevalence of this issue until about a year ago when we started talking about it at meetings, and people would come up to me and start to tell me stories of their own personal ordeals. And there have been many. They have been personal to that individual. They have been about the family. And so we'll see what the results show here, but I will tell you I won't be surprised if A and B are fairly high based on what I've experienced over the last 12 months or so. One other thing, let me just throw in very quickly. Cal used an expression, human capital, when he was talking. One of the things I forgot to say, it's one of the reasons we got involved in this as a financial organization, is if you look at your company, what is the most important asset in your company? It's your human resources. And if we can do anything to protect our human resources, then we've gone a long way towards helping our individual construction companies. Those are rather stunning statistics that 14% of you have dealt with this personally. 52% of you have dealt with a family member. As I said, while you were casting your vote, that doesn't surprise me, to be honest with you, based on my experience over the last 12 months. Thank you, everybody, for your honesty. Let me toss it back to Michelle Walker.
Thanks, Stuart, and thank you, Bob, for sharing your story. It's so impactful, and you do such a great job of sharing that and sharing so much great information along with the story. We want to move into a section of the program now where we discuss what are ways that we can incorporate some steps into our workplaces in order to help our employees that may be dealing with mental health issues or suicidal thoughts. And the model that I want to give a quick overview of, and I won't do the full justice that Sally Spencer Thomas does, but is an upstream, midstream, downstream model. And the story that goes along with it is that you're walking along a stream out on a lovely day with a friend, and you notice somebody is in the river and they're drowning, and you rush in and you help them and you pull them out. And as you're working with them to help save them, there's another person, and you rush in and pull them out. And this goes on, and suddenly there's more people than you and your friend can help. And suddenly you take a step and you start running upstream. And your friend says, where are you going? There's all these people that need help. And the answer is, I'm going upstream to see why all these people are falling in. At some point, we have to stop focusing. Where this really started was at a suicide point, and how do we help suicidal employees, and what do we need to do if there is a suicide in the workplace? But we really need to move upstream and deal with the issue before it even becomes an issue and prevent mental health from escalating to the point of suicide or even to a point that it affects the workplace and building that caring culture. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to Cal, who's going to take a look at the upstream approaches with us, which are those real fundamental building blocks of improving our company's culture to protect our workforce.
Hey, Michelle, thank you very much. The first time we heard that model, it was a little bit upsetting. And the way you just told that analogy takes us back to that day. We said we have to do something more. And to keep shifting it upstream, making this a strategic issue, making it a priority but a value in our companies. And so I've shared previously that this is what my day job is, and it is to provide safety and wellness for company employees. So the upstream is really focused on prevention. And the best prevention is to build these protective factors into your company. Some of those examples would be integrating mental health and suicide prevention into existing safety, benefits, and wellness programs. But also things like in our HR functions, new employee orientation, onboarding, supervisory training, and ongoing wellness workshops would be examples. And number two, focusing on the prevention of problems. So making those processes really simple so employees know who do they turn to in those companies to provide support. And the third is to make certain that employees understand the available resources and then promoting those resources. A lot of organizations initially were telling us that they didn't do many things, and yet as we started sharing some posters for prevention to start the dialogue, companies started embracing those, and they started saying, well, I'm using those in wellness, I'm using those in lunchbox meetings or toolbox talks. So there were existing structures that were really providing a good framework for support. And so what you do in the upstream model is, again, focus first on that leadership. How do we get leadership engaged, and how do we empower leadership to take those bold actions? That's a big purpose of the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention. It is an upstream model to expand and multiply the effectiveness of what we're doing at CFMA. So thank you to all the organizations whose bold leaders have signed on for this purpose and this cause. Number two, when it comes to integrating with the safety, health, and wellness, we're pretty excited about opportunities to expand to make this a multiplier throughout the workforce. One of the things my company is doing as a signatory to 3 labor unions is reaching out to labor unions to have those discussions. And so one of the things that we did last fall, me and one of my HR partners internally wrote an article for a newsletter for the employees of the operating engineers. It was a great example to address why that union was concerned about their members. A thing that we want to do more of, not only in my company, but the construction industry, is to do peer-to-peer support networks. There's going to be an article that is featured in the Association of Union Constructors that talks what the SMART union is doing to promote peer-to-peer networks. And we're really excited to have some of these additional resources being available. One difference between the U.S. model of mental health and suicide prevention and Australia, on suicide prevention, they spend more time teaching coping skills and life skills. And I think that's a very important, significant difference, but it's one that we need to continue to do more. And that would be workshops or even workplace services to help people who have those coping skill deficits that lead to anger and rage, some of the issues that Bob talked about in his story. The turning point in this upstream model was developed in the fall of 2014, and it's the construction industry blueprint that addressed suicide prevention in the workplace. This is one of the resources that are available to all the members of the Construction Industry Alliance. It's available on Sally Spencer Thomas's website, the CFMA website, and another website that Michelle will talk about under resources. It's a great starting place if your organization hasn't begun. The last item that I want to talk about are 2 additional resources. One, my company uses a book called Safety 24/7. It's how we are teaching personal responsibility for safety and shared accountability among crews. And it was the precursor for us addressing this as a safety issue. Safety 24/7 talks about safety at home, work, and play. And most of us, we are finding, have a commitment to getting employees home safe at the end of a shift. When it comes to addressing mental health, it's just as important to get employees at risk back to work safe from home. And that is where we're at with CFMA and the Construction Industry Alliance. What I want to show you will be the covers of two incredible PDFs. These have been great resources. These are all focused on upstream and also includes the midstream and the downstream. 10 questions leaders should ask themselves about why this is an imperative. And number 2, action steps that companies can take to actually save lives. So I'm going to hand this back to Michelle. She's going to talk about the midstream. And Michelle, those two resources are chock full of upstream, midstream, and downstream strategies.
They are, and they do a great job going even deeper into the upstream, midstream, and downstream approaches than we'll be able to cover today. So thank you for sharing those, Cal. So the midstream approach is really the point at which there is a problem identified or an employee is experiencing a mental health issue that's affecting their performance, or somebody may have noticed a change in performance or a change in behavior. And the midstream is, what do we do when a problem has been identified or we think a problem may be there? And so the real goals at this point are early identification, so addressing those problems, identifying them before they become crisis level, and then linking to care, providing the resources to get our employees help, and teaching them and showing them what's there and what's, in most cases, already available. So some actions to think about at the midstream approach is learning warning signs and responses. Thinking of this as CPR. In the construction industry, it's very common for us to have our employees first aid and CPR certified, and we need to look at that similar type of training for addressing and dealing with mental health issues and concerns. In the suicide and mental health world, it's called QPR, question, persuade, refer. And one great tool for learning this is the Working Minds program that Sally Spencer Thomas has developed. And we're excited to announce that CFMA is partnering with her to create a construction Working Minds for our education class that will equip people with the tools to help recognize the signs and identify the steps needed in order to refer employees for help. So the goal here is not that we all become mental health professionals and that we're offering counseling in our offices. It's that we identify when there's an issue and help connect the people with the proper care. The second thing to consider is screenings. Biometrics have come a long way in the last few years, and construction companies have been embracing wellness programs, and we need to start incorporating mental health into those wellness programs and add mental health screenings to go along with the biometric screenings that are becoming more and more common. A few ways of doing that. Mentalhealthscreening.org is a great website, and there's a National Screening Day that the Construction Industry Alliance will be taking part in later in the fall to create a real industry-wide awareness and participation in screening for mental health. The other is on the MAM Therapy website, which we'll be looking at in a little bit, but there's a 20-point head inspection, which is a great introduction to employees who may be new to this world of mental health and who may be a little bit scared or intimidated by it. But it's a great way of introducing the topic of mental health screenings and getting that conversation going within the workplace. A real key thing is using mental health as part of performance management. So focusing on the issue behind possible performance concerns. Maybe a great employee is suddenly showing up late or missing a lot of work or having near misses or safety incidents or not performing at the level that they typically did. And so looking at the reason behind that, and is there a mental health, is there a substance abuse issue that's causing these problems? And then really looking at what we can do to connect that person with care. A story that I would like to share quickly happened here in my workplace shortly after I became involved in this suicide prevention initiative. And we had a long-term employee who suddenly was having issues with family. We were getting calls from his wife saying that he was not coming home. He was having issues on the job site. He was angry. He'd never been angry. He never was one to yell, and he was expressing anger and issues on the job site. And because of the awareness that I gained from Cal and from Sally, I approached it from a very different approach. And instead of terminating him, which really, typically, he would have been at the point of termination with some of the incidents that had happened with lying and about performance and things like that. And instead, we met with him and we got him connected to a counselor. And he was given a 6-week leave of absence to work in depth with a counselor. And he was required to check in weekly and show that he was attending counseling sessions. And he came back after 6 weeks, and you could not ask for a more turned around, complete individual. He was so proud to tell us of the accomplishments that he made with his counselor and his therapist. And it's just a great success story. And he's won because his family is more whole and healthy than it was before. And we've won because we have a great employee who is still on board and who's going to be our biggest advocate for others who may be experiencing similar issues. So really embracing that performance issues, often an underlying cause may be mental health. And so connecting those dots and providing the resources that are available. And then on the resources, having employee assistance programs and knowing what they provide, knowing how they can connect somebody to mental health services, make sure that they are connecting them with quality resources, and then understanding your benefit programs, whether it be through your EAP or through your medical insurance, knowing how to access, typically it's referred to as behavioral health services within the medical insurance programs, making sure that those networks are large enough and accessible enough that they can provide benefit to the employees, and then publicizing them. So that's another big step that we've taken here at SSC, is publicizing the mental health benefits that are available and making them part of our typical benefit program overview, just like we would have talked about urgent cares and ER copays and all of that, incorporating the mental health benefits as part of that program. So with that, I will turn it over to Stuart for our third polling question.
Thanks, Michelle. Third question. Has your company, your workplace adopted any of these, what we call protective systems? A, yes. B, yes. And we have an employee assistance program. C, we've talked about it, but we haven't adopted anything yet. And D, no discussion or adoption. I think, this question will give us some sense of where we are in terms of moving the ball along, because this is where the rubber meets the road. We talked about awareness. We talked about some of these issues, but this is an important question to find out where the industry is at this point in time, because this is where we can and will, I think, make a difference. The other thing I would mention while we're waiting for the results is Cal mentioned something a couple of times about union efforts. And if you look on the list of our Suicide Prevention Alliance members, we are working to kind of go to the next level and work with some unions, because we think they could be very effective in helping spread the word to their union members, which would have a greater impact on what some of the companies are doing, to kind of show support for what the companies are doing. Not surprised. Do any of you have protective systems? 4% said yes. 28% said yes, and we have an EAP. 13% said we talked about it, and there's been no discussion or adoption by 52%. Once again, I'm not surprised, and I think that shows how far we have to go from here to be effective in this effort. Let me move it over to Cal now to continue the conversation.
Thank you. So Michelle gave the overview of the upstream, midstream, downstream model. I talked about those protective systems in the upstream. Michelle talked about the midstream, taking care of current employees. The downstream is focused on managing crises, and it's really focused around the issue of restoring your functioning, building a new sense of normal in your companies. There's one method of downstream that's called postvention. It's when an individual has died by suicide in your company, perhaps it's a family member in your company, and you would be providing critical incident stress debriefing services, also known as grief or some type of trauma support. That one is a sad one. It's very necessary. It provides for dignity for that individual, but among the whole workforce. And it gives you an opportunity to reach out and to provide what a friend of ours named Bob Van de Paul speaks about, providing leadership during times of crisis. Bob spoke at the 2010 National CFMA conference on that topic of critical incident debriefing, and many of us continue to talk about how beneficial that is. Other steps in the downstream are really, again, restricting access to lethal means, making certain that individuals who might be at risk have an opportunity to vent and voice or vocalize their concerns, and really being prepared beyond the suicide prevention lifeline, identifying service providers in your geographic area who provide crisis management services, who are the local resources for the suicide prevention lifeline. Here in my home market in the Seattle to Portland area, there are two groups that we've been partnering with, one in Oregon named Lines for Life, one in Seattle called In the Forefront, affiliated with the University of Washington. They are focusing on providing a spectrum of services and consultative methods. Those types of organizations are a great place to reach out so you can provide supervisory training and work with your HR department to ensure that you have identified those resources. So the downstream method would involve caring for the family and the widow or widower of the folks who did die by suicide were that to happen. Ideally, through the upstream and the midstream, we're going to be casting a safety net to prevent people from slipping through the cracks. And that's what a big goal of our effort is. To help us better understand this dynamic of mental health and to understand mental illness and to provide a human aspect to it, Stuart and Bob are going to have a conversation, and it's going to be a conversation about mental health. And so, Stuart and Bob, I'm going to hand this back over to you.
Well, Bob, we'll do this in kind of a little Q&A format. So talk to me, please, about the impact of suicide on the construction industry.
Well, I think we've had quite a bit of information from Michelle and Cal regarding the extent of it. When you look at if we've got a 53 per 100,000, I know in the industry I left, just the union sector of that was about 150,000 members. And if you take that, that means the painting industry that I left, the union painting industry, is going to suffer 75 to 80 suicides this year. It's huge, but here's even a bigger issue. The most people that study this estimate that there's at least 25 attempts for every suicide. So that puts it in a category we're looking at, take how many suicides an industry has and take that times 25. Those are the number of attempts, and that has a huge impact on, and as we've heard too from Michelle, absenteeism, quality of work, productivity, all those things besides the human impact. So it's extensive, Stuart.
Let me add one story, Bob, that just hit me when you were talking. I was talking to an electrical contractor who I've known for many years. They're a very large electrical contractor, and I was talking to him about the issue of suicide prevention, and his eyes were kind of bulging out as if I was telling him something about his company that I knew that I wasn't supposed to know. He said, "You know that we've had 3 suicides in our company in the last 18 months, and one of them happened when one of our supervisors hung himself in the boiler room of a Fortune 100 company, and he had to go back out to the Fortune 100 company and convince them to keep them on the job." Now, that's a harrowing and an awful story on a number of different levels, but it certainly can talk also about the impact on the construction industry. Bob, let's move on to the next question. What are the most common mental illnesses that we see?
The 2 most common, Stuart, are anxiety disorder and depression. And we need to remember that these are oftentimes influenced by alcohol abuse or substance abuse, and influenced in a bad way. And oftentimes there's a continuum on these illnesses. So, for instance, anxiety disorder, a person may have just a slight instance of it or extensive, but we have to remember they're all treatable. And the sad part is, I think it was a previous slide said how few people actually get treatment. And that is, I would submit back to partly accessibility, because mental health clinics are not as accessible and common, especially in rural America, but also the shame to walk in and say, I have a mental health issue. We have to get rid of that shame.
Thanks, Bob. And how common do you see mental illness being in our society as a whole?
Again, I'll refer, I think, back to a previous slide, but 25% of the adults in the United States will experience a mental health issue this year. Another 10% will experience or have addiction to alcohol or drugs. And as been mentioned by previous presentations, our industry is even worse than the national average. So you're thinking about your fellow employees. Probably a third of the workforce we deal with every day is having a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue, and that's impacting just everything in their life. So if we can help those folks, besides the caring nature for themselves and their well-being, just think what the impact would be on their productivity and for the companies that we all work for.
Thanks, Bob. What are some of the key signs that someone is having suicidal thoughts?
They're pretty numerous, so I'm going to categorize these. There's verbal clues, there's behavioral clues, and what I call situational clues. And again, we're thinking of people that they're not thinking clearly because their mind isn't working clearly as it should. So some verbal clues. If you hear these, you have to take them seriously. People aren't joking when they say these things. I'm just a burden. I wish I were dead. Soon you don't have to even worry about me because I won't be here. Now, the danger we have that's so absurd, we kind of laugh it off. But none of these are absurd. They're serious issues. Behavioral clues would be withdrawal from family and friends, putting personal affairs in order, giving away prized possessions, and a big one is just as Michelle referenced, unexplained anger and moodiness, total change of behavior. Something is going on at that point. And some situational clues would be loss of a job. In our industry, high male ego, losing your job is very, very serious. That could turn somebody with a mental illness totally in the wrong direction. Loss of a major relationship, death of a spouse, child, or friend by suicide. Sometimes that creates that thought, and diagnosis of a terminal illness. So those are some of the warning signs. They need a response. You can't ignore those.
And I guess, Bob, the follow-up question is, those are the signs. What do you do?
Well, first off, person needs to be alone. Michelle used that example. Probably the most important thing is show a caring, non-judgmental interest, not to do something judgmental to say, well, you sure as heck aren't thinking of suicide, are you? That'd be stupid. Or just think of all the things you're going to lose by doing that. That's not going to do any good at that point. You should be trying to figure out, I've really been concerned about your performance lately. I'm concerned about your well-being. Tell me what's going on. You create a platform to talk about it. And then if you're really getting concerned, you need to ask some really hard questions. And that would be, are you having suicidal thoughts? What that does, it allows the person to say yes, and then they can open up even further. Or another hard question would be, are you thinking of killing yourself? It's a point of opening the door and really dissecting what's going on. The question you don't want to ask is are you thinking of hurting yourself? Because at this point, they're in pain. They aren't thinking of hurting themselves because they're going to end the pain. The other piece, remove any lethal devices you see that are accessible. This could be even as small as a utility knife. In our industry, there's many, many items that can be used lethally. Stay with the person. Don't leave them alone. And another resources would be if you make a 911 call, ask for a CIT trained person. That's a crisis intervention training person. Most police departments have those folks on hand. They'll understand how to handle a mental crisis. And then there's the hotline that was on one of the slides, suicide hotline. 800-273-TALK. All those are good resources. The key is not to leave the person alone.
The next question. Why do mental health clients discontinue using their medications, and why do they self-medicate?
Well, I'm going to compare a lot of this to physical illnesses. Again, it's an illness of the brain, which is a physical part of our body. People discontinue because there's a lot of side effects. And if you look at any medication any of us take, usually the side effects scare you even to wonder, why am I taking this? I can use Michael as an example. Many negative side effects to his medication. So what does anyone think of doing? And if you're not thinking clearly, well, this stuff's not working, so I'm going to quit taking it. And I'm going to use what I know will make me feel better. That's to self-medicate with some of the substances I use. So that's why people quit taking it, one reason. Another reason is, again, with physical illnesses the same, I'm feeling better. I think I'm over the worst of it. I don't need that stuff anymore. I'm going to quit taking it because I feel so good. We have in our society a problem with antibiotics. Any of us that get a prescription for antibiotic, what does the doctor say? Take the full dosage for 10 days. Why do we have the problem? Many people don't take up the full 10 days because they feel better. So it's either the side effects get someone to try something different or quit taking it, or you feel better and I don't need it anymore. And again, we have to realize they're not thinking clearly. So that'd be my answer to that question, Stuart.
Thank you, Bob. Last question. Kind of a great summary question to get us full circle. What do you want to convey to construction industry leaders about their relationship with their employees?
Well, I think it's been brushed on about culture. So, again, after my son's death, I got a little smarter. I'll be the first to admit, Michelle brought it up. If an employee wasn't performing, it was very easy to say, we've given you all these chances, you're not performing, I got to lay you off. Unfortunately, I've done it many times. As I look back, some of those clearly were having some mental crisis issues, substance abuse issues. So I think we need to change our outlook on it as an industry. It's typically in the past been a pretty harsh industry. I think we have to realize our most important resource for every company is our people. And if somebody is showing just different behavior or showing their performances, try to mitigate that and say, what's really going on? And if that person isn't willing to get some help through an EAP program or whatever, then, you're kind of out of luck. But so I would say you start even by when you go visit job sites. And I did a lot of that. And it took me a while to get smarter. All I was worried about on job sites in the past was how much did we get done? Do we have any safety issues? Do we have any quality issues? And are we making money? Then I'd leave and go to the next job. Versus, you got to address all that stuff, but it really opens the door to say, geez, I read in the paper your son got accepted at West Point, or I hear your daughter graduated from high school, whatever it might be. Show some real interest in the person as a person, and you'll find that opens the door where at some point, or, I need you to go out of town. Is that a problem? I know you got some young kids, and tell me if that's going to be a problem. We have to give permission to open that door, but we have to start it as managers. So that would be my hope. And I guess that's more the upstream, just to get things started, open conversation. And once you create a safe environment, you'll find people will tell you, I can't work nights because I have to see my AA counselor 3 nights a week. I hope you understand. And of course we want to accommodate that. But if you don't open the door, you don't even know that. So that would be my answer to that question, Stuart.
Thank you, Bob. Some fantastic information for everyone to consider. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me, at this point, turn it back to Michelle Walker.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Bob. That was great information and has spurred some great conversation on the chat. It's been great to see people's responses to the information and facts that you've shared. Now, in closing, before we get to questions, which if you have questions, please feel free to post them on the questions section, and we'll get to them at the end in just a few minutes here. We wanted to just run through some resources that are available to everyone in the industry to help you take this message into your company and start making a difference. So one of the things that we talked about a bit at the beginning and have referred to a few times is the summits. There's been 4 summits so far, and you can see on this slide that there's many more planned, in addition to just some different chapter meetings within CFMA at some other conferences. If you can get out and attend one of these or participate in maybe putting one together, a summit is a great way that brings together those tools that Cal talked about, which include the local resources. So at the summit, it's not only a learning environment from people such as Sally and speakers such as Bob or Cal, but we also bring in they bring together the community of mental health professionals that are there so that you can make connections within the community and know who you can refer your employees to. So the summits are a really critical piece, and you can see that there's many opportunities coming up that you can get involved with. For those on the call that are CFMA members, the national conference here in June is going to have 2 sessions, and the first is really exciting. It's what I referred to earlier, and it's the rollout of the 4-Hour Construction Working Minds program. And there'll also be another one delivered by myself and Dave James, who's been a critical member of this initiative, and we'll be talking even more in depth as to resources and action plans to really put this into action within your company. Just wanted to give a shout out to Cal. He was recognized as the top 25 newsmaker by ENR for his work in this. And the more publicity and articles that we can get published and recognized in these just continues to spread the word and make other people aware of this issue and the need to address it. Another award that was given actually to the Workplace Task Force of the National Action Alliance that Bob and I are members on with Cal is the IRMI, International Risk Management Institute, provided an award, awarded that group with for the work that's been done in the workplace and in the construction industry. A key place that we've referred to many times, and this is the home of many of the documents that Cal referred to in his slides as far as the construction industry blueprint, those 2 Great 10 Question articles, is the CIASP webpage, which is at cfma.org/suicide prevention. And on here, on this resources page, you'll see those top 4 documents are the ones that Cal referred to during his. As you scroll down this page, there's other articles. We've had over 40 articles published in the last year and a half, many of those written by Cal to spread the awareness among the industry in many different publications. If you go down to the very bottom of this page, there are links to the posters that were used in several of the slides, and those are a great first step to implementing this in the workplace, to have those posted and available for employees to start that conversation. So these are all here. There's also tools for and calendars for summits and other upcoming events. This is the Construction Working Minds website that has also many links to different resources and documents, and is a great other step to go to learn more about the topic, find resources, connect with resources in your community as well. And the last site that we'll just look at is mantherapy.org, and I referred to part of this early on, but this is a great way. Sally Spencer-Thomas, her organization, worked with a marketing team in Denver and learned that a great way to get men talking about mental health and okay with it being brought up is to make it funny. And so while that doesn't seem to go hand in hand with the topic of mental health and suicide, they said if it's sad and scary, it's not going to reach as many people. So this is Dr. Rich Mahogany, and we're going to watch a short video that gives us an overview of the Man Therapy program.
Man Therapy is a place where men can come to be men. So here, We won't be complaining, whining, or moping about. No, we'll be getting off our keisters and tackling feelings like anger, stress, sadness, substance abuse, and even suicidal thoughts head on. By using the manly techniques found in my office, you'll have tools you need to deal with the tough situations life sends your way, like breakups, layoffs, and your pain-in-the-ass teenager. And man therapy isn't just for men. It's also for anyone with a man in their life. So if you're here because you're worried about your son, husband, brother, or brother from another uterus, be sure to check out the Worried About Someone section below.
Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed that little overview of a really great program. And one of the tools that's available on this website, among many other things, and I encourage you to visit the mantherapy.org website, is the 20-point head inspection that I referred to earlier on. And it's a great kind of first step towards that screening process, and it's kind of set up more like a 20-point car inspection, so it's less intimidating and scary than saying, we're going to do a mental health screening today. So here is a quick video to show you how that program works.
Welcome to your appointment. Please take a knee. Make yourself comfortable. Now, to help me better recommend manly tips, activities, and resources for you to explore in my office, I'm going to ask you to fill out a questionnaire about yourself, your feelings, and your life. After you finish, I will use my patented man therapy calculator to evaluate your answers and provide you with some suggestions. Oh, and don't bullshit me. There's nothing I hate more than bullshit. Except for maybe shopping malls and spandex.
So as you can see, there is many tools out there to make talking about this and bringing it into the workplace much more approachable than it might seem at first light. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up for the resources. I'm going to turn it over to Stuart for our last polling question. And then if the audience has any questions, please get those in. We'll be happy to answer as many as we have time for as we wrap up the webinar together. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Last question. Have you visited any of these resource websites? A, yes. B, no. Simple question. I think I have my guess as to what the answer will be. Once again, I think it'll speak to our need to continually educate on this topic. I will tell you one thing that I think is very interesting and very telling about the presentation that has happened today, and I know all the presenters, Cal, Michelle, and Bob did a fantastic job. We've been on for close to 90 minutes, and 5 people in 90 minutes have taken themselves off the webinar from over 250 people. So that's a fantastic salute to keeping your attention and providing material of interest to all of you. So thanks to our presenters. And not surprisingly, 13% of you said yes, and 86%. That doesn't add up to 100, but that's okay. You know, we are a financial management group, so I'm very careful about that. 86% said no. Not surprised. I think that talks about our need to continue to educate on this topic. Thank you, everybody. Now, Cal, we have 5 minutes for questions, so go for it.
Stuart, thank you very much. I know this gentleman. I don't know that he's going to care that I use his name. So David Hunter from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, a quick shout out. You gave a great comment about having success linking your wellness program with your EAP. And you commented that you've arranged for a counselor from the EAP to come out on the same day as health coaches. Everyone meets with the employees. That way, no one knows who is getting EAP counseling. It looks like it's just a health coach meeting. I thought that was just a great, quick comment, so I wanted to give that a shout-out. It really wasn't a question. Number 2, Michelle, you covered this in the very beginning. We have a question from James, who's asking about what is it about suicide that makes it a gender-driven predominantly male problem. Would you give a quick highlight, Michelle, to the factors that you've kind of already highlighted?
Sure, and it's been interesting to see the chat go on around this question also, and I think people have covered a lot. I think it's the real demand on the men to perform and provide and feel like a failure if that can't be accomplished. And then also just the women are much more comfortable with, and society accepts it a lot better when women maybe talk about feeling sad or feeling depressed or needing help or needing to talk, and men are more afraid to make those requests and make those needs known, as well as just the friendships and the bonds that women are more likely to have than men. The statistics on number of friends that women have that they consider close friends compared to men is staggering. And so I think for many of those reasons, just the real sense of trying to be in control of themselves and their feelings and not knowing how to cope with it when they aren't able to be in control. I think those are all main factors.
That's a great comment. Go ahead, Bob.
Another factor, men unfortunately have typically used firearms in their attempts, and therefore there are usually not a second attempt. So that's a difference also.
A very good point. The male mortality, 51%, is from firearms among those men, and it's very unforgiving, as we unfortunately know all too well. So, Bob, I wonder if I could give you the question from Daniel that says, speak to how the occurrence of suicide in a group lowers the stigma and can lead to a string of suicides or a cluster or a contagion effect. Do you feel comfortable taking that question, Bob?
It's more prevalent with youth, and when there's a adolescent suicide, what I've learned from NAMI is there's a higher degree of copycat. But here's the issue. If it was a loved one or a close friend that died by suicide, that can put a tremendous burden on the people around them. So again, as we grieve, we need to really support the people that are the loved ones left behind, because there's a high incidence, especially of children of parents that die by suicide. They have a high incidence of also dying by suicide.
Thank you very much for that great response. Anita asked the question, does the construction suicide statistics also include construction professionals on international projects? Not specifically. The data were drawn from health department data in a number of states. The number of states has subsequently been expanded, and Michelle mentioned our friend Dave James from the Valley of the Sun chapter in Phoenix. And Dave has been working with researchers at Florida State University to do a better demographic breakdown on the extraction mining industry and the construction industry. However, Stuart previously mentioned this is an international issue, not just a domestic U.S. construction industry issue. And Stuart, with that, would you share just briefly what you learned on your recent trip to the United Kingdom with the Mates in Mind program?
Thanks, Cal. Unfortunately, I can't do anything briefly, so it'll be a challenge. But let me try and do something like that. So I was fortunate to be in London 3 weeks ago, and I was with David Whiteman, a former secretary of CFMA, and we met with the group called Mates in Mind in the UK. And it's a different approach, and arguably a more effective approach, but it's different. They have taken a more top-down versus kind of bottom-up approach that we have. They have enlisted some of the major construction companies. They have enlisted some of the major developers into their program, to the extent that one of the developers we talked to indicated that you can't bid on a construction project with them unless you agree to follow a 4-step training program that Mates in Mind has created over in the UK. So it's part of the specifications. That's a very powerful tool. The one other powerful difference is the government has gotten involved. They're version of our OSHA has gotten involved in this issue, and that is something we've thought about, and we're going to look into ways to possibly engage the U.S. OSHA into thinking about how they might play a role in this as well.
Stuart, thank you very much. Bob, for your great presentation as well. Michelle, for all your great organization. Let's hand this over to Ariel so she can do a wrap-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Cal and Michelle and Bob, for a very moving, very informative presentation. From some of the comments that we've seen in the chat area, I feel very strongly that this was something that we definitely needed to do, and I'm very pleased that it turned out so successfully for everyone. So just want to say thank you to all of you, and thank you to our attendees, and of course, thank you to CFMA's President and CEO, Stuart Binstock, for speaking and providing commentary on the session today. Just a reminder, this program has been recorded, and if you know any colleagues or friends or anyone else that would benefit from this program, please feel free to share the on-demand archive. It should be available in a few days. You can access it through your account on CFMA's Education Online portal. With that being said, we want to thank everyone for attending. Please come back and to our March 8th webinar. From 3 to 4 p.m., we will be presenting Maximizing Financial Reporting with Ellen and Tucker. Thanks again, everyone. We hope to see you on our next webcast.